Hello viewers, welcome to the episode of Long-Term Source of Finance. In the previous episode, we have discussed about the short-term finance and its various sources. In this episode, we will be discussing on the long-term finance and its sources. For better understanding, this episode is divided into 5 parts, namely long-term finance, capital market, kinds of ownership securities, shares, debentures, bonds and other sources. Let us learn about the long-term finance first. Long-term finance is the finance required for a period exceeding 5 years. The financial manager has to assemble funds from numerous sources to satisfy varied long-term financial needs of the firm. A firm requires long-term funds to acquire fixed assets such as land, buildings, plant, machinery, furniture, etc. in order to create production facilities and also for major expansions, diversification and modernization of an existing firm. Investment in these assets represent a part of firm's capital which is blocked on a permanent or fixed basis, which is called as fixed capital. Features of long-term finance. The main features of long-term finance are: number 1, long-term finance is required for more than 5 years. Number 2, it is required for financing fixed capital of a firm. Number 3, it is required for establishment of a new organization and also for expansion and development of an existing enterprise. Number 4, shares and debentures are the major sources of long-term financing. Number 5, usually long-term loans are raised against collateral securities. And number 6, it is costlier as compared to short-term sources of finance. Capital market. Capital market deals with medium term as well as long term funds. It refers to all facilities and the institutional arrangements for borrowing and lending term funds, both medium and long term. The demand for long term funds comes from private business corporations, public corporations and the government. The supply of funds comes largely from individual and institutions investors, banks, other industrial financial institutions and government, making the funds available to industrial and commercial undertakings. In simple, capital market is the market which deals in shares, debentures, bonds and securities. Features of capital market. Capital market has the following features. Number 1, capital market deals in long term and medium term loans. Number 2, capital market is concerned with the transfer of long term and medium term funds from investors to industrial and commercial entities. Number 3, ownership securities like equity shares and preference shares and creditorship securities like debentures and bonds are dealt in the capital market. Number 4, capital market makes available to the industry sufficient amount of long term capital at reasonable rate of interest. And number 5, capital market deals in large amount of funds. Functions of capital market. Capital market performs a number of functions. They are: capital market facilitates large scale nationwide mobilization of savings and financial resources. Capital market is composed of new securities market, that is primary capital market, and the stock market, that is the secondary capital market, both of which ensures ready and continuous markets for long term funds. Capital market helps in procuring foreign capital, which helps the economic development of a country. Capital market ensures effective allocation of the mobilized financial resources among the projects which yield good returns. Capital market provides profitable investment opportunities to the small savers and investors. Kinds of ownership securities, shares. A share is a part of the ownership of a company. A person who buys a portion of company's capital becomes a shareholder or the owner in that company's assets, and as such receives a share of the company's profits in the form of an annual dividend. The Section 2, subsection 46 of Indian Companies Act of 1956 defined a share as a share in the share capital of a company and includes stock except where a distinction between stock and shares is expressed or implied. A public limited company can issue two types of shares, namely equity shares and preference shares, as per the Section 86 of the Indian Companies Act of 1956. Let us discuss them one by one. Equity shares. Equity shares are known earlier as ordinary shares or common shares. Equity shareholders are the real owners of the company as they have the voting rights and enjoy decision making authority on important matters related to the company. The shareholders' return is in the form of dividend, which is dependent on the profits of the company and capital gain or loss at the time of their sale. They enjoy higher returns if the company performs well and may not get any dividend at all if the company does not perform well. They are the last to get the repayment of their capital at the time of liquidation of the company. Features of equity shares. Equity shareholders enjoy a number of special characteristics which distinguishes from other securities. These features relate to their rights and claims, which are as follows. Number 1. Maturity. Equity shares provide permanent capital to the company which is not under contractual obligation to refund it during its lifetime. The shareholders can demand their capital only in the event of liquidation, and that too when funds are left after covering all prior claims. In short, there is no maturity date for the equity shares. Number 2. Claim on income. Equity shareholders are paid their claim on income only when claims of creditors and preference shareholders have been met. They enjoy their claim on the residual income of the company. They may not get anything if the earnings of the company are sufficient to meet only the prior claims. They cannot even legally force the company to pay dividends to them if the company does not have sufficient surplus, or even if the company is not willing to meet the claims of them. Number 3. Claim on assets. Equity shareholders have a claim on the ownership of the company's assets, but the claim is residual. That is, their claim will be met only in the last after covering all prior claims of creditors and preference shareholders. Number 4. Voting rights. Each equity shareholder is entitled to one vote for each share of stock he owns. That is why they are the real owners of the company. Equity shareholders appoint the board of directors, and hence they exercise an indirect control over the company. Number 5. Preemptive rights. A public limited company is under legal compulsion to offer new issues of equity shares to the existing equity shareholders before placing them in the market for public subscription. Such a right of equity shareholders to purchase newly issued equity stock is termed as preemptive right. Sweat equity shares. Sweat equity shares are equity shares issued by a company to its employees or directors at a discount or as a consideration for providing technical know-how, intellectual property, or a similar value to the company. Normally, the sweat security is issued by the companies in two different categories. Number 1, sweat equity shares are issued at preferential pricing, more specifically for employees. And number 2, sweat equity shares are issued at face value that may be either at par or at premium. Bonus shares. This type of issue is merely considered as book entry in between the two different sources of long-term finance, namely free reserves and equity share capital. This type of issue is normally restricted to the companies which are having the partly paid equity shares. The bonus issue is permitted by making the partly paid up shares into fully paid shares. The bonus issue is normally decided in the board meeting. Preference shares. As the name indicates, preference share represents that part of the share capital of a company which carries preferential rights and privileges with respect to dividends and assets over equity stock. Section 85 of the Companies Act of 1956 defines preference shares as those shares who fulfill the following two requirements. A. Preference shares carry a preferential right to be paid a fixed amount of dividend. B. They carry a preferential right at the time of repayment of the capital on the winding up of the company. Types of preference shares. Number 1. Cumulative preference shares. Cumulative preference shares give holders the right that if a dividend cannot be paid 1 year, it will be carried forward to the successive years. Dividends on cumulative preference shares must be paid despite the earnings levels of the business, provided the company has distributable profits. Number 2. Non-cumulative preference shares. For non-cumulative or simple preference shares, any dividends that are unpaid or accrued in the previous year cannot be carried forward to the subsequent year or years in respect of that year, and that is considered lost by the shareholders. 3. Redeemable preference shares. These shares come with an agreement that the company can buy them back at a future date. This can be at a fixed date or at the choice of the business. A company cannot issue only redeemable shares. Number 4. Irredeemable preference shares. Irredeemable preference shares or non-redeemable preference shares need not be repaid by the company except on winding up of the company. The company is not offering to buy back the securities. Number 5. Convertible preference shares. Convertible preference shares have the option of converting them into a certain number of ordinary shares after the expiry of a specific period. Non-convertible preference shares. Non-convertible preference shares are those which do not have the option of their conversion into the equity shares. Number 7. Participating preference shares. Participating preference shares are entitled to a fixed preferential dividend and have the right to participate further in the surplus profits after payment of certain rate of dividend on equity shares. Number 8. Non-participating preference shares. Non-participating preference shares are entitled to fixed rate of dividend only. They do not have such rights to participate or claim for a part in the surplus profits of the company. Debentures. A debenture is like a certificate of loan issued by a company which is liable to repay a specified amount at the end of stipulated period and to pay periodical interest. Although money raised through debentures becomes a part of company's capital structure, it does not become share capital. Section 2, subsection 12 of the Indian Companies Act defines debenture includes debenture stock, bonds and any other securities of a company, whether constituting a charge on the assets of the company. Features of debentures. The following are the important features of debentures. Number 1. A debenture certificate is an acknowledgement of debt. Number 2, a company in India can issue secured or unsecured debentures. Number 3, the rate of interest is fixed and known to investors. Number 4, the maturity date and the amount repayable are indicated on the debenture certificate. And number 5, debentures create a charge on the assets of the company. Types of debentures. Debentures are classified into the following 4 bases. Number 1, on the basis of security. Number 2, on the basis of holding. Number 3, on the basis of redemption. And number 4, on the basis of convertibility. Number 1, on the basis of security. Debentures are further classified into 2 categories, namely secured and unsecured debentures. Secured debentures are those which create fixed or floating charge on the company. These debentures are also known as the mortgage debentures. On the other hand, debentures which do not create any charge or security on the assets of the company are known as unsecured debentures. The holders of these debentures, like ordinary unsecured creditors, may sue the company for the recovery of the debt. Number 2, on the basis of holding, debentures are divided into 2 categories, namely registered and bearer debentures. Registered debentures are the debentures which are repayable to the registered holders. A registered debenture holder is one whose name appears both on the debenture certificate and in the company's records. Only they are entitled to repayment of the principal amount and periodical payment of interest, but these can be transferred through the transfer deed. On the other hand, bearer debentures are those on which periodical interest is payable to the bearer and transferable by mere delivery. It never requires registration to enter in the books. The holder is simply having the eligibility for redemption. Coupons are attached with such debenture certificates, and the bearer of such certificate can fill in the coupon and can claim the interest after sending it to the company. Number 3, on the basis of redemption, debentures are classified into 2 types, namely redeemable and irredeemable debentures. Redeemable debentures are those which are issued on redeemable basis or issued on the condition that they shall be redeemed after a certain fixed period, whereas irredeemable or perpetual debentures are those which are not repayable during the lifetime of the company, but the debt becomes due for redemption only when the company goes into liquidation or when the interest is not regularly paid as and when accrued. On the basis of conversion, debentures are bifurcated into fully convertible and non-convertible debentures. Fully convertible debenture holders are given the option to convert their holdings into equity shares after a specified period, and such holders get the opportunity to take part in the affairs of the company. Usually, a period of 18 to 36 months time will be given to the debenture holders to make the decision, and periodical interest is payable till the process of conversion is complete. Non-convertible debentures are those which cannot be converted into equity shares. The predetermined amount is repaid on maturity to the investors. Bonds and other sources. Bonds are long-term debt instruments issued by a company to raise the funds from the market. Bonds are issued for a specific period and it carries fixed rate of interest. A bond is quite similar to that of a debenture but still has certain features of its own. They are: bonds are issued at a face value or at a discount. Rate of interest is fixed or floating. Maturity date is specified in all types of bonds except for perpetual bonds. Redemption value is either at par or at premium, predetermined at the time of issue of bonds. Bonds are traded in the market. Types of bonds. Number 1. Secured and unsecured bonds. Secured bonds are raised against the collateral security, that is, assets of the company, whereas unsecured bonds are issued without any collateral security but issued on the basis of the name and fame. Fixed rate and floating rate bonds. Fixed rate bonds provide fixed interest payments on a regular schedule for the life of the bond. Floating rate bonds have variable interest rates that are periodically adjusted. Number 3. Redeemable and perpetual bonds. Redeemable bonds have to be repaid after the expiry of the stipulated period. Perpetual bonds, on the other hand, do not have any maturity. Number 4. Zero coupon bonds. Zero coupon bonds do not carry periodic interest at all, but offer an advantage that they can be bought at a discounted price of the face value and can be redeemed at the face value at maturity. Number 5. Deep discount bonds. A deep discount bond is another kind of zero coupon bond. Large discount is made on their nominal value. Interest is paid only at the time of maturity, which may extend to 3 to 25 years. Borrowings from commercial banks. Recently, commercial banks in India have started giving loans for a long period. Commercial banks give long-term loans, that is, for more than 1 year. The period of repayment of short-term loans is extended at intervals, and in some cases, loan is given directly for a long period. Commercial banks provide long-term finance to small-scale units in the priority sector. Loan from financial institutions. There are many specialized financial institutions established by the central and state governments which give long-term loans at reasonable rate of interest. Some of these institutions are Industrial Finance Corporation of India, Industrial Development Bank of India, Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation of India, Unit Trust of India, State Finance Corporations, etc. Venture capital financing. Venture capital plays a strategic role in financing small-scale enterprises. The venture capital activity is quite advanced in developed countries. Now, in many developing countries like India too, this concept is gaining momentum. There are two parties: the entrepreneur who has the idea about a project which might yield good returns but lacks huge funding, and the venture capitalist who is capable of investing huge amounts provided that he sees good returns in the project. Venture capital is also called as risky capital, where a venture capitalist takes risks and finances new project and earns high returns primarily in the form of capital gains. The entrepreneur and the venture capitalist would get together in the growth of enterprise as partners. Lease financing. Leasing is widely used in Western countries to finance investments. In the changed economic and business environments, India has also accepted lease finance as a major source of long-term finance. Here, the owner of an asset called lessor gives another person, the lessee, the right to use the asset against periodical payments called lease rentals. The periodical payment made by the lessee to the lessor is known as lease rental. Under this lease financing, lessee is given the right to use the asset, but the ownership lies with the lessor, and at the end of the lease contract, the asset is returned to the lessor, or an option is given to the lessee either to purchase the asset or to renew the lease agreement. Hire purchase. Hire purchase financing is an instrument of financing assets of higher value. The parties included in hire purchase financing are known as the hire vendor and hire purchaser. Hire vendor is one who sells the assets to the hire purchaser and makes a small part of the total cost of the asset, which is known as the down payment, and the balance of money is paid in installments over a specified period of time along with some percentage of interest as agreed mutually by both the parties. Here, the hire purchaser will only get the possession of the asset and the legal ownership is transferred from the hire vendor to the hire purchaser only on the payment of last installment. However, if the hire purchaser so wishes, he can return the goods back to the hire vendor. To sum up, long-term source of finance refer to the sources of financing long-term financial need of a firm exceeding 5 years. They are costlier compared to short-term sources and raised against collateral securities. Capital market refers to the institutional arrangements for borrowing and lending funds for medium and long-term financing activities. Various ownership securities like equity shares and preference shares and creditorship securities like debentures, bonds, etc. are dealt in capital market. Long-term financing is also be possible through borrowings from commercial banks, financial institutions, venture capital financing, etc. Hire purchase financing is another alternative financing in which the hire purchaser will only get the possession of the assets and legal ownership is transferred only after the payment of last installment.